Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. So a little about Maria. Maria is a training coordinator at Hong Fook Mental Health Association with over 28 years of experience working with immigrants from diverse cultural backgrounds. She has substantial knowledge on the obstacles, challenges, and stresses derived from the migration process and how these challenges have had an impact on immigrants' mental health and ultimately on the overall health. In her career, Maria has worked with diverse groups, including victims of discrimination, victims of family violence, isolated seniors, newcomer youth, and many other groups. Maria has spent over 20 years in developing, organizing, and facilitating mental health education and training in the settlement sector. Maria has developed her own curriculum in mental health and continues to support the immigrant community in Toronto. Maria has obtained her Bachelor in Social Sciences at the University of Western Ontario and possesses various certifications, including Certified Crisis Intervention Instructor Training, Mental Health First Aid, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, Narrative Exposure Therapy, Diffusing Anger Training, Resistance Hostility, and Wellness Recovery Action Plans. I'm sure Maria has many more certificates which are not mentioned here. Maria is currently working at Hong Fook Mental Health Association as the training coordinator since 2008, and we're very excited to present Maria. Maria, the floor is yours, and we are ready to be educated by you. Thank you for joining us today and providing this training to us and information session.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Misha. Can you please make me co-host? I would like to share screen.
Your request has been completed.
Okay, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to be here and an honor to spend 2 hours with every one of you to discuss a very important topic and a timely topic as well, confronting anti-Asian racism. We are going to share some tools, strategy, and most important, I believe that each one of us, each one of you have a tremendous knowledge on racism. So through our discussion, I'm sure we will come up with lots of different methods or tools to work together in solidarity, to combat the racism. So let's go through a little bit on the objective of the section. During my presentation, if you cannot hear me clearly, and if you have any question, just unmute and speak out, all right? So the objective of this afternoon's section is to explore the various manifestations of anti-Asian racism. How does it manifest, including the historical background and the current expression. It is very important that we look at the historical, how it comes, how people experience racism. And also we are going to deepen our understanding of how anti-Asian racism interact with other forms of discrimination. As well, we are exploring strategy and resources to identify and address this racism and explore the role of wellness and mental health support in addressing all forms of anti-Asian racism. As we know, people who are experiencing racism, they go through lots of traumatic experience, and that impact greatly on people's mental health, eventually the holistic health, the overall health. Before we go deep into the discussion and into the presentation, I would like to draw our attention to remind everyone kindly that when we are talking about Asian, that certain image may come to our mind. But when we are talking about Asia, it is the biggest continent, right, in the world. So it consists of diverse countries. People are diverse. So we must bear that in mind. It is not a homogeneous group we are talking about. So first of all, when we are talking about Asia, it consists of 6 sub-regions. It has the central, west, south, east, north, and southeast. And more facts about Asia. According to the United Nations, in the most recent, how you call that study, Asia consists of 49 countries. And in fact, some country will refer, when we are talking about Asia, they will say that it has 45 countries. Why is there a discrepancy? Because some countries are located in both like Europe continent and also Asia. So it depends on the country's interpretation, how they see this country. Is it belong to Europe or belong to Asia? That's why it can be vary from 45 to 53. And why 53? Because some country or some so-called special administrative region, for example, Taiwan. And as we are aware, many countries, or even including United Nations, they do not recognize Taiwan as a country because China claimed that Taiwan is part of China. So that also contribute to the different interpretation of the number of countries in Asia. So you can see how diverse it is. And also, according to the Statistics Canada's projection, in 2036, which is only 14 years away from now, that when we are talking about immigrant population, the majority of our immigrants are from Asia. So it is from 56 to 58% of the immigrants are from Asia. So more than half of our immigrant population are going to be from Asia. And in Canada, the three most commonly report Asian origin are from Chinese, following East Indian and Filipino. And also, let's look at the history of anti-Asian racism. How does it come? In Canada, when we are talking about anti-Asian racism, it's not only referred to now, what's happening now, the racism happening now. It also refers to the historical experience that people are going through and the ongoing discrimination that people are suffering from. And it includes the negative stereotyping and the injustice experienced by people of Asian heritage based on the others and even the country's assumption about their ethnicity and nationality. And you know, only 20 years ago, which is in 2002, the government declared May to be the Asian Heritage Month. So this year, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary of the Asian Heritage Month. And this is to recognize, the purpose of this is to recognize the achievements and contribution of the Canadian, of Asian heritage, contribute to the country. But because it is always important when we are talking about the population that we are not only focusing on the racism, we are also focusing on their contribution and the achievement as well. It also, a very important function of that is to remind every one of us that we are part of Canadian, that it is our role, that there is a role to play in combating anti-Asian racism. It's not only the Asian need to worry about that, because it affects each one of us. So let's look at the history of that. First of all, let's look at the Chinese, how they had experienced that, the history of that, how they experienced the racism from the beginning. You know, the Chinese population, they how they come to migrate to Canada. In 1881, our president, Sir John A. Macdonald at that time, he decided to build a Canadian Pacific Railway, the famous Canadian Pacific Railway. And it needs a tremendous labor. And also they cannot get enough labor from within the Canada. And also, more importantly, that it costs a lot of money. So they want to bring in the foreigner to come and work for, to build this railway. So many of Chinese are being brought in. 17,000 of Chinese immigrants arrived in Canada during those 4 years to help to build this Canadian Pacific Railway. And of course, the moment that they entered the country, they experienced different form of discrimination. It was widespread. And you know what? During these 4 years, so many of these workers died because they were placed in, especially across the Rocky, the portion, the railway, and it was known as the most dangerous and risky part. When there is a very famous statement that every mile of this railway, there is one Chinese worker buried, hurt, or died from that. So you can see that the contribution and also the tremendous effort that the Chinese has placed in that. And yet, after they complete this railway in 1884, the government want to send them back. They really want to discourage them to migrate to Canada. But of course, there is already people who become a citizen of Canada that they cannot expel. So there was many different very unbelievable policy being in place. For example, there is a policy saying that it is illegal to bringing rice on the street. Can you imagine that? And we all know that Chinese people eat a lot of rice, and Asian, right, eat a lot of rice. So that kind of policy is really clearly, it is against the Asian population. And also, for example, you cannot marry Chinese people. And also they are forbidden to take part in like a professional job. For example, doctor, lawyer, architecture, they were not allowed to enter those professions and even to enter those faculty as well. So also in 1885, because they wanted to stop these Chinese immigrated to Canada, the head tax was imposed through the Chinese Immigration Act in 1885. At the beginning, $50 was being solicited, that every Chinese immigrant, if they want to migrate to Canada, they have to pay $50 head tax. It's called the head tax. And in those days, which we are talking about over 140 years ago, that $50 is a lot of money. And yet, even with that head tax, it cannot deter people from coming. So in 1923, they raised the head tax to $500. And in those days, $500 equal to 2 years of salary. 2 years, 2 full years of salary. And you can buy 2 houses. So you can imagine that is a tremendous kind of money to deter people from migrating. And they also introduced a Chinese Exclusion Act that to make sure to restrict all the Chinese immigration coming. And also, even they successfully migrated to here, that many restrictions were being placed. They cannot vote. As I say earlier, they cannot enter certain faculty. They cannot enter certain profession as well. And that act was only being repealed in 1947, which is only about 74 years ago, not that long ago. And for the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, most Canadians, as I say, they are not allowed to vote until 1945, that is being repealed. So that is the history of the Chinese, the part of the history that facing them. And now also look at the Japanese. They are not also immune from those discrimination. In fact, they start migrating to the country since 1871. And the majority of these Japanese, they resided in the West Coast, and the occupation are mainly with fishery and farming. And because in 1941, Japan, they were involved in the Second World War II, that because of that the Canadian government deemed them as the enemy alien. That need to be isolated, that need to be imprisoned in an internment camp. And not only that, all their property and possession were being confiscated. And they were moved to this other area, to this internment camp. And on top, they were expected to pay for the food and for this in this imprisonment. They have to pay for that. And it's very humiliating. It involved 21,000 of these Canadian of Japanese heritage. And also, when the war was over, in order to prove the loyalty to Canada, they were expected, again, to moving east of the Rocky. They cannot go back to where they were before. They were expected to move to the other part of the Rocky, and also, or signing a paper agreeing to repatriate to Japan, going back to Japan, to prove that they are loyal to Canada. And it was only being redressed in 1988, which is what, 30 some years ago. And also they got an apology for that. And now let's look at the South Asian. The South Asian, they are the British, they're under the British subject, the British Empire. So that the Canada, of course, it is very difficult to reject them from coming, right? Because they are the British, Canada have the close relationship with that. So in order to deter them from coming, that they introduce this policy called the one, how you call that, the one continuous ticketing arrangement. What does that mean? That means in order to be able to successfully migrate to Canada, you can only make one continuous journey. For example, in those days, we're talking about in 19th century, in those days, that, I mean, that it's not like today, right? That maybe you can just wait one continuous journey, you can arrive to everywhere in this world. But in those days, you have to go through different countries in order to arrive in a certain country. So that make it impossible for the South Asian to come to Canada with only one strict, direct journey. Okay, so that is why it comes. And there is a very famous tragedy happened in 1914. 1914, there is a ship called Komagata. I hope I did not pronounce it wrong. Please pardon me if I did. It's called Komagata Maroon. And it consists of about 300 and, sorry, let me have a, it consists of 376 prospect immigrants from Punjab. Okay, they travel from Punjab through Hong Kong because the ship cannot have that much oil or fuel, right? So they have to stop at Hong Kong to in order to make the journey, continue the journey to come to Canada. And because that make it not a continuous one ticketing arrangement. And because of that, they will refuse to be admitted, even they are boarded at Victoria Harbour for months and months. And after 2 months, so many people die because the ship, you can imagine so many people in this ship that with lacking of food and lacking of support. And finally, they were being sent back to India. And another tragedy happened. In the way back to the India, there is a crash and 19 passengers died. And only until 2016, which is what, only 6 years ago, that the government of Canada made a formal apology for this wrongdoing. So as you can see, this is a long history of discrimination and racism happened. And I would like to show you a video at this time. And please don't worry about taking note. I will send out this PowerPoint to all of you at the end of the presentation.
And a troubling pattern has emerged during the pandemic, bringing rise to a larger, longer, more systemic issue of anti-Asian racism. The violence is unsettling. 856 Canadian incidents since COVID began. Asian Canadians are being assigned blame for bringing the virus to Canada and told to, quote, go back home, having slurs spewed at them, and elders are being beaten in the streets. Two of our experts on Cityline join us today with their experiences. Welcome, Pei and Trevor, as well as Amy Go, the president of the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. Now, Amy, I always like to start at the beginning. I like to start at the governmental level and talk a little bit about history and some of the ways the government has contributed to the racism that Asians have experienced in this country.
Definitely. As soon as Chinese came to Canada in the 1800s, we were met with racist laws. Large number of Chinese laborers were brought into Canada to build the most dangerous part of our Canadian railway to unite the country. So after the railway was built, almost immediately our president of government, said that these machines had to be returned. So in 1885, they imposed a head tax starting at $50. It went up to 1903 for $500. $500 in those days, you could buy 2 houses in Toronto. But all these actually failed from the perspective of the government. So in 1923, they imposed the Exclusion Act, banning all Chinese from Canada on July 1st. So July 1st became humiliation day for Chinese communities. And these are not just the only legislations. There are many others banning Chinese from conducting specific businesses, from entering professions, from, of course, exercising the rights, and including Chinese men could not marry white women. So you could be put to jail for falling in love. So these are just some examples in our early days. And of course, as you said, these legislative discrimination, unfortunately, continue to have an impact on us today.
And this is what we mean when we say systemic injustices are baked into the system. So the country is built by people from outside of the country, and then when they try to become part of the country, they are told, no, you've done your job, go back home. Very important to get the context so that we know where the racism is rooted. And also, Canadians, we're always patting ourselves on the back. Let's not be so quick to pride ourselves on our multicultural society, because we have work to do here. So, Pei, I'm going to go to you now. You post a lot about anti-Asian racism on your social media feeds in the hopes of educating people. One thing you're very vocal about is the assumptions that people make because you are Chinese. So talk to me about what you've encountered.
It's things that you've experienced your whole life. And I've been very lucky. I've not experienced any violence. I've not experienced a crazy outburst where someone has, physically harmed me or tried to harm me. But there are little things that go out through your entire life that at some point as you get older, you think, wait a minute, this doesn't happen to everyone. I mean, I grew up in Nova Scotia where we didn't have a large Asian community. Then when I moved to Toronto, some things are a little bit different. And that's when I noticed there was a little change in people's perception of me. But even in a multicultural city like Toronto, I'll get questions like, where are you from? And often I'll say, Nova Scotia. And no, where are you really from? Because the assumption is, well, I'm Asian. I couldn't possibly be from here. I must be a foreigner. Now, it doesn't mean that there's like hatred behind that question. But when you're asked that constantly, you do feel othered. It's like, oh, people don't think I'm from here. I must be from somewhere else. I've had people say to me when I said I grew up here, they'll say, well, you don't even have a Chinese accent. Why would anyone who grew up in Canada have a Chinese accent? So there's those assumptions. There's assumptions of things like, well, you must be good at math. And a lot of those violent attacks against Asian Canadians and Asian Americans, only a small percentage get reported. And I think that's something we have to acknowledge, because culturally, we don't raise our voices. We don't say anything. We don't complain. And there's a real fear of speaking up. And there's a language barrier for some as well. So there's a lot of little things that when you say something to someone who is Asian, think for a second about why you made that assumption. Like, I've been told in every city I've ever been in that I look just like someone that they went to high school with. Did I? Or were they Asian?
Yeah, and what you're what you're speaking about, a lot of things. You talked about the model minority situation, but also microaggressions. And so, Trevor, I want to get you in on this conversation, and you can talk about either or, like talk about microaggressions you have experienced, or maybe feeling like very kind of trapped by this whole idea of the model minority.
Tracy, it's very, very similarly to what Pei says. These are things that we've experienced our entire lives. I can remember my experiences either in schoolyards or on the playing fields when I played organized basketball and soccer. People were surprised that I could actually shoot a basketball or jump or run fast because Asians are not supposed to be athletic. And so that carried on even in my corporate life. I can't even tell you the amount of times people had asked me whether I knew martial arts or kung fu, because I'm assuming because I'm Asian, but it wasn't. I don't think you go up to anyone on the street and ask them if they know kung fu or martial arts, or the commentary on if I can actually see properly through these eyes. I mean, these things are so normalized within and ingrained in society culturally that we don't speak up enough about it. You know, in the food business, we get it all the time. The dichotomy and the discussion around things like MSG. And there are studies behind the article that was written in the 60s about MSG and how it was fabricated compared to the scientific facts of what MSG is, because the main core ingredient inside MSG is something called glutamate that's actually naturally created in all our bodies. And it's in things like green tea, breast milk, tomatoes, Parmesan cheese. So we talked about that. And also, like, being a restaurant owner myself, I kind of almost feel like we have to work extra hard to depict that our restaurant is clean, because how many times have we heard the commentaries? If I can show you some of the reviews about, oh, I wonder if the food is clean, I wonder where their food is from, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of times what this is, it's normalized conversations. And as a model minority, people assume that we'll just put our head down and it'll just bounce off of us. But listen, you hear it long enough, you hear it enough times, it almost becomes normalized for us. But now, with the onset of the pandemic, as well as the violence against seniors, we need to really take a look at all this historically and change the systemic sort of language around everything that we're used to.
Language is power, and we've said this before. If we don't start changing that, it's very difficult to change these assumptions that people have gotten so normal, like they've gotten so normalized, as you said. So, Amy, what do folks need to know when it comes to assumptions?
So all these perceptions need to be checked. So I would call upon everybody to think about whenever you encounter an Asian Canadian, whenever you are reading about news about Asian Canadians, when you're in the workplace or wherever, to understand all those impacts of all those assumptions and perceptions and stereotypes, and how each one of us should start to reflect on our privileges, on our position in the society, and how we can exercise our rights and our responsibilities to correct these assumptions, as well as to challenge systemic racism, to challenge the inequities in our system, in our laws, and everything.
Amy, Trevor, and Pei, thank you for sharing your lived experiences and also for the education. I appreciate it. We appreciate it so much.
All right. I really like that, the video. It really indicates, even nowadays, how that racism manifests. So now let's look at some very, very common stereotypes of Asians. First of all, I myself had to go through that. I remember when I first come to Canada, because I graduated from a Chinese school, high school in Hong Kong. So when I first came here, I have the severe language barrier. I was considered as someone who has learning disability and was being placed in those classes. And whenever I speak, people will say, oh, I cannot understand you, and being dismissed and being disregarded. And I felt, oh my God, I'm really questioning my intelligence. I thought I must have some learning. I began to believe that I can never learn English. So one of the stereotypes is either just like what in that video, for people who's born here, even they speak fluent English without accent, they were being said, oh, wow, how come you can speak so fluent English? Your English is so good. Even, they were born here, just like you and me. I mean, not me, right? But many of those who's native born in Canada. And that is the assumption. And also people who are having accent, always considered as someone who is not as intelligent. And wow, you are from Hong Kong, you must be rich. Unfortunately, I'm not. So, there is from the statistic, even from 2016, the census, Canada census, it indicates the Chinese immigrant are 23% of the Chinese immigrants are living in the poverty situation. Okay, and in 2020, which is only 2 years ago, Sept Canada also released another set of statistics indicating the three most ethnic groups that are living in poverty are Chinese. Chinese are the number one, and South Asian, and also Blacks. So you can see that we can only see maybe certain Asian that they are being incredibly rich, but the majority are not. So that assumption also hurt. Another stereotype, what is that? I'm sure we know too well that, oh, you're Asian, especially like maybe Southeast Asian, that you must be very submissive, you're very passive, oh, speed up, you should voice your concern, you should not just keep silent, you should not just keep your head down, that kind of comment constantly being received. And also, I'm sure we all know too well that if you are Asian, oh, you must be good at math, and you must be very good in academic. Actually, when I do the research, many statistics or survey, they indicate that the Asian student, they are more likely to engage in longer studying time. And I guess that is also have the cultural background for that, because we were expected to excel in our schoolwork. And in order to live up to that people are compelled to work harder. And also another stereotype is, oh, you are Asian, then you must be living in an extended family situation, that you must be always listening to your family, you still go for the arranged marriage, that kind of assumption, stereotype. Oh, did anyone want to ask a question or something? Because I can hear some background noises. If not, I will continue. So now, from the film, we saw how does the anti-Asian racism today, how does it manifest? Okay. Yeah, I will continue if no one has any question, okay? The microaggression, what is that? That is some sort of comment that it seems to be non-threatening, harmless, but yet it makes people feel that in other way. For example, where are you really from? Just like the video. I myself always got asked for that. Although I'm already a Canadian citizen, and yet until today, if I say I am a Canadian citizen, I'm still being asked like, where are you really from? And you speak good English for Chinese, that kind of comment. And it seems to be a harmless comment, and it's maybe even a place. And yet that also portray a notion that you are forever foreigner, that a foreigner can speak good English, that although you are here for 30 years and you still, where you from, And also another thing is that, oh, you are so articulate. What does that mean? What is the underlying meaning? That, oh, wow, for someone that from your background, that, wow, you are considered to be very articulate. That means there is different standard to measure. If you're Asian immigrant, that you're able to use the English language, that you are considered to be very articulate. And some people will say, when I look at you, I don't see color. And that itself, it is also, I would say, not addressing, not facing racism head on, not addressing racism. A store owner following a customer of color around the store. So that is, how you call that? Like, we would say that a passive aggressive, right? Although they did not say anything, but following the customer around the store, indicating that there is no trust in that and afraid maybe shoplifting or something. And someone will say, I'm not a racist. You see, you can see I have so many Asian friends or Black friends. Or being asked, why are you so quiet? Oh, Chinese people are always so passive. They are not, they will not participate in the discussion. Speed up more. And when we look at the television show, I'm sure that each one of us can notice that, feel very aware that we will feature people with Asian color. And even if they did, maybe they are in a very minor role or even a humiliating role. So as we can see that in the daily operation, we can experience that microaggression. And we all saw that video. We talk about the model minority myth. It seems to be when people making a statement like, you are the Chinese people, they are intelligent, they are excel in academic, and they make good money. It seems to be incredibly like a high placing, and yet it have many shortcomings. And I think from that video we already saw that, and I'm going to show you another video later. This term, the model minority myth, it was introduced by, it comes from United States, introduced by a sociologist, William Peterson, to describe this phenomenon in 1966 in an article published in New York Times Magazine. And that implies certain ethnic minority are better than others, better in adjusting to the different culture, and they are more hardworking, and they are more academically, excel. And the myth, but that seems to be a place, and yet it creates a further social width among the minority groups. And also for the people who's being praised, that's like myself, I'm a Chinese, but unfortunately, I'm not good at math, and I am not how you call that? Not excel in my academic study. So that I internalize that, and it is true, I internalize that stereotype, and I often feel guilty about that. How come I cannot achieve the 90% in my math, and how come I only got a B in this assignment and all this? So that is driven us to have this high expectation on ourselves, and it plays tremendous emotional, academic, or economic torment on ourselves as well. And even when we need help, we are very reluctant to seek help because of that high expectation. What? Maria, don't tell me you don't understand this. And also it erases the racism faced by Asian in the past and present. Because what more do you want from us? What more do you want? Like, you already given the opportunity, we praise you, and we said you're hardworking, and we separate you from the other minority group, so you should be grateful, right? So that erased how the racism faced by this group of people. And also another shortcoming is that it makes us consider ourselves as forever a foreigner. We can never assimilate into this culture because we are always being seen as a foreigner because our skin is like olive or yellow or different color. Okay, so I am going to show you this film that can explain more in detail what is that notion.
smart, borderline nerdy.
Being driven to success.
Who don't cause trouble.
Hardworking. And we not call for attention to oneself.
Smart, successful, wealthy, hardworking, and self-reliant. These are some words we often associate with Asian communities across Canada. They are also stereotypes perpetuating what we call the model minority myth. While some of us may not be familiar with the term, it's a feeling that we've all encountered to varying degrees. The model minority myth depicts all Asian Canadians as highly intelligent and hardworking, a shining example of how to overcome discrimination and hardship. In other words, we are the law-abiding citizens, the favored neighbors, and the non-threatening group of color. What on the surface may seem like outstanding praise becomes a double-edged sword. Here's how the model minority myth is problematic. It contributes to a culture of silence. Being pressured to meet the standard of the so-called good immigrant, Asian Canadians are often hesitant to speak out against social injustice, including recent incidents of anti-Asian violence related to the coronavirus pandemic.
There's very much this culture of like, just keep your head down and work hard and everything will be okay.
Kind of underneath that is this idea that we've already given you this opportunity. Now you want more? You want the opportunity to speak your mind?
Between 1881 and 1884, over 17,000 Chinese people migrated to Canada to help build the Transcontinental Railroad. Targeted by racist policies, Chinese workers were exploited by being paid lower wages. Likewise, in 1942, Japanese Canadians under the War Measures Act had their possessions seized and sold. Forcibly interned, many were then displaced to interior regions of Canada to work as indentured laborers for little pay, often under inhumane conditions.
My family were evacuated from Vancouver to a little town called Raymond as a beet worker. I think my father worked for something like 25 cents an hour. At our farm, we were in an old chicken coop. I could remember in the mornings when we woke up, there was no insulation. It was absolutely cold, and the sheet would be frozen where you breathe, and it would be a cone.
Today, Asian communities face similar kinds of exploitation and discrimination that they faced back then.
As a temporary foreign worker, your stay in Canada is dependent on a singular employer. You cannot work for any other company. During the early weeks of the pandemic, many of the workers in the meat plants actually started to notice that things are happening. There's something wrong happening on the floor of the factories, but they were not heard. And so it took the death of a worker for the public to know the situation and force the closure temporarily of the meat plants. Because their situations are not known, or not probably known but not fully acknowledged, and therefore public system decisions do not address their vulnerabilities. Of course, your presence is acknowledged and tolerated, but is your voice actually being heard?
Dans mon milieu de travail, on prend toujours pour acquis que je vais être une bonne travaillante puis que je suis intelligente. Mais ça, en fait, ça légitime juste que tu peux me donner des heures supplémentaires puis que je vais pas me plaindre, ou que je vais rester silencieuse, passive puis suivre les ordres de la majorité.
Asian people in particular, what they experience is the phenomenon called the bamboo ceiling. Similar to the glass ceiling for women, that makes it particularly difficult to break through due to, in large part, the organizational culture and myths and stereotypes that people have about racialized minorities, including Asian people.
The second problem with the model minority myth is that Asian Canadians are not all the same. Just like our dumplings, we are different inside out. In fact, not all Asian groups in Canada benefit from the same level of financial success and education.
Even within one ethnic group, you would not have had the same experience, but certainly across like country borders and stuff and different generations of immigration.
As much as I think it's great when we kind of group together as Asians and build solidarity, there is a little bit of erasure that happens with individual groups. For Filipinos, as much as it's great to be bunched in and have that sense of community with other Asians, we're quite different from other Asians. We're often omitted, we're often not there. Usually folks talk about Japan, China, and Korea.
Breaking down the data by ethnicity and looking at things like employment and education, you start to realize that not all Asians are crazy rich doctors or real estate moguls. Many of us are working class, are employed in precarious jobs, or lack work stability, education, or access to citizenship. These are the realities that get masked by the model minority myth and feed the false narrative that says that there aren't social needs for Asian communities. Finally, the third problem with the model minority myth is that it is a tool used to divide communities of color. By definition, a model minority cannot exist in a vacuum. For a group to rise as the so-called model, they are pitted against other groups in the same system. Historically, the model minority myth has been used to create a wedge between Asian Canadians and other minorities in Canada. Elevating Asian Canadians as deserving and hardworking diminishes the struggles of other racialized minorities. It minimizes the role systemic racism plays in perpetuating inequality. So to sum it up, the model minority myth is problematic because it silences our voices, it masks different realities and challenges that our communities face, and it creates divisions between people of Asian descent and other minority groups. So what actions can we take as individuals and as a society to dispel this label?
Education. Education is so important. And, it's a continuing education from both sides.
The less we talk about it, the less the system is going to change.
To speak for ourselves, to speak truth to the issues that we experience, and in what ways then are we also the drivers for change?
We have to fight for that because we cannot get there with just staying silent. You can join protests, you can lobby politicians.
We should be working together to collectively and collaboratively address our common concerns because we are actually seeking the same thing, equity and equality for all people.
If we don't start the discussion, who will?
I really like that video. It really very clearly indicate what is the model minority myth bring, to the community, and that's draw us our attention to the individuals. I want to be myself, especially individuals are diverse. So when we are talking about the anti-Asian racism, I think, including myself, I am Asian origin. I'm from Hong Kong, a Chinese origin. I also have to constantly reflect on myself. I truly believe that no one is immune from racism. I mean, we were born and we were being fed into certain notion or certain beliefs since we were born. So we have to be constantly reflect on our own belief, our own assumption, and our own, discrimination as well. So when we are talking about race, often people will only focus on nationality, the color of the skin of the color, and also the language people speak. But when we are talking about discrimination, the racism, it is not only based on the race, it's so many layers. If I am the woman from Asia, I am facing more difficulty. Yeah, when we are looking at the statistic, the recent statistic, the Chinese women are among the group that are facing poverty, the highest group that facing poverty. So you can see that the gender also play a very important role. For someone who have not like a post-secondary education and who is a woman, and who is a racialized group, from a racialized group, that they are facing even more obstacle. I would like to share with you one of the story later on that to illustrate how, when we are talking about racism, it intersects with so many other determinants. When we are talking about the determinant of health. So when we look at 2 years into the pandemic, this Angus Way poll showed that 71% of Asian Canadians felt that the anti-Asian racism worsened. I'm sure that we all agree with that. Let's look at some statistics, very alarming. 66% of reports were submitted by women. So it's more than half of the anti-Asian racism complaints are from women. 286% increase in report by children and adolescents. So again, you can see the youngest generation, the young generation, they are even more the subject of being victimized by racism. And 132% increase in the report of online hate and racism. And 42% increase in report of assault. So we are not only talking about verbal, it can be physical, right? The assault, including being coughed at or spat on. Oh, this is very alarming as well. 318% increase in report by South Asian people. And 121% increased report by the Southeast Asian people as well. So you can see that really alarming figures happening. And also that when we are looking at, we will think often that, oh, Canada is always more modest compared with our brother, the United States. And yet, when we are looking at this anti-Asian racism, Canada has more than double number report incident compared with US. And Vancouver was actually, in fact, it was called the capital of anti-Asian racism. They have the greatest number of Asian attack there. And what more is that the World Health Organization, what they found is that Canadian women of East Asian origin were responsible for 72% of filed report worldwide. So you can see that the majority complaint or incident being reported are filed by women, 72%, even higher than in Canada. The Asian people are, and another fact is that when we are talking about involuntary admission for mental health treatment, that the Asian people are disproportionately being served. That means that involuntarily admitted to the mental health institution to be treated. So what does that mean? That means the Asian people are much more reluctant to seek mental health services or to seek help from mental health institution. And even they did, what they found is that they are already escalated to a later stage. That means the illness are already escalated. So you can see that all these statistics, it is alarming. As I say, when we're talking about racism, it is not only about between different groups, it is structural. As we can see from the history, institutional, it's interpersonal and internalized. Because of this, doing this presentation, I have done many research, and it is so alarming that when we are talking about these Asian people were being brought into the Canada to build the Canadian Pacific Railway. When that job was completed, when the task was completed, you know what we were being referred to? That they are only machine. So they must be being sent back to the country immediately. That this group of people were being referred to as a machine, not even a human being. So you can see that when we are looking at the racism from the historical background, it is structural, it is institutional. Of course, like if they are not being admitted to the certain faculty, they are not being shortlisted for certain professional job, and so on. Oh, another fact I want to share with each one of you is that a recent study by a survey by U of T as well as the Ryerson, and now it's called the Metropolitan University, that what they found is that when people submit their CV, the resume for applying job, if their last name it is like of Asian background, that they have 30% less likely being called for an interview. And if you use the full name, for example, my Chinese name is Mo Yin Eng. If I use that name in my CV, I have even less chance than even less than 30% chance of being called for to have this interview. So you can see that when we are talking about racism, it is not only happening between individuals, it is institutionalized. Of course, it's also interpersonal on our daily interaction with our colleague, with our friend, and with other community. And most of all, it also being internalized. As I say, and when people being, for those people who's even being born in Canada, but of Chinese origin, being constantly asked, where are you from? That we are being, that is fact of life. We are being called Ching Ching. I was being called that too when I was first attend high school and university in Canada, or being some gesture, to display that discrimination. So you can see that I began to believe that, oh, maybe after all, I am being perceived as a foreigner. Maybe I can never be assimilated into this country. So that is most harmful as well. So when we are talking about that, so we have to be very, very mindful that it also intersects with other kinds of discrimination, the gender, sexuality, and class, and educational background, many layers, disability, you name it. So let's look at how that racism impact on individuals, on our health, on not only on our daily life. So when we this is just imagine if we are being discriminated because of something that we can never change, because of my skin color, because of my nationality, because of my sexual orientation, because of my religion. That's something that I truly believe on, that I cannot change. That is part of my identity, but I'm being discriminated because of that. Then how do I feel? I feel helpless. I feel shame. I feel hopeless. So that feeling will very, very harmful on my mental health. And not only that, if I did not address that for the longest period, I may have, I suffer from trauma. I may develop anxiety disorder, depression, and PTSD. And there is many studies, many surveys have indicated that when people are suffering from discrimination and racism, it is one of the top factors that impact on people's mental health. And the fear that, afraid that this may happen again. When I view those video, that the interview that they interview those people are being violently treated because of the racism, that one key fact keep coming up, that they are so frightened. Even this is like 2 years ago, until today, they cannot settle. They still have nightmare. When they go out, they are so afraid. They are being afraid that they're being pushed without any reason, without any warning. So the fear that this may happen anytime, any minute when we are out of our house. So that fear, you can imagine how impactful on our health. And also, of course, that lead to the poor health outcome, negative physical and mental health outcome, and the negative health-related behavior. Some people, we will be maybe smoking more, we will use our substance to mask this pain, to mask this shameful feeling, to mask this unspeakable, fear inside us, smoking more. And this stress of being discriminated, being under this racism, the tremendous stress that people has to be experiencing on a daily basis, okay, that impact our functioning, It also impact our resilience, our confidence on ourselves, and our coping skill. Because if I begin to doubting my ability, I still remember, as I share with each one of you, at the beginning, I was being regarded as someone who has learning disability. Even I began to doubt my ability at the beginning. I never talk about this at home. I'm so afraid to talk about it. I'm so shameful to talk about it. And because of that fear and because of that internalized belief, that definitely hinder my coping skill as well. It's not only it impact on individuals' mental health. When they do the research, they also found that people have more shallow breathing when people are under this tremendous stress. That is not, it manifests in the physical, behavior. The breathing become more shallow, the muscle tension, and the trouble sleeping, and losing of appetite. One of these psychologists at BC, what she found is that one very damaging effect of racism on mental health is we begin to internalize it, as I share with you. They start to hate their own ethnicity and have negative thought about their own body or their personal appearance. But this is something that they cannot change. And all this hatred will chip away our self-worth and self-esteem and impact our well-being. I would also like to share with you another recent focus group that conducted by CCNC, the Chinese Canadian National Council. Because of this anti-Asian racism, the drastic rise during these past 2 years, they formed a focus group to address that. And what they found is that even from the grade 3, as young as grade 3 student to grade 5, on the elementary grade I'm talking about, when they were asked, were they being discriminated or experiencing this racism, what they say, almost all of them had experienced that, being called ching ching, being called that you have this the eye, like the pull the eye up, that the eye is so small, and things like that on a daily basis. And yet when they asked how do they perceive that, you know what? They said that, oh, that's okay. Oh, they are just joking. So you can see that become a fact of life for them, that they internalize it. Oh, like they don't even call that as racism. So it's a fact of life. So you can see that for people who grew up here, who are of Asian origin, that on a daily basis, if they experience that, they become internalized that. It is even something that is harder to address. I just want to summarize that when we are talking about the impact of this stress, it's not only psychologically that making us feel worthless, shameful, and insecurity, of course, and also physiologically, that it weaken all our internal system. It weaken our immune system because we have to put all our energy into combating this racism, right? It also compromises our digestive system. Even we cannot breathe properly as well, our hormone, our metabolic system as well. So talking about all this, we have to explore some strategy, based on the wellness and mental health support in addressing all these forms of anti-Asian racism. First of all, if we are not the one who have gone through that, we can advise our friend, our client, whoever being affected, ensure our personal safety and security first if we are going through that racism. And build a strong emotional support system is very, very crucial. I know that there is not that high reporting rate to police. And also, actually, when we are working with the police the police system, that we were constantly being told that the only so much the system can do. Because when they are defining racism, when they are when the police can take action, certain prerequisites has to be met, and which is many times it is impossible. So it relied heavily on the individual and also in the organization, in the community like you and me, that we can provide that support to this group of people, to the individual who has been going through that unpleasant experience. So build a strong emotional support system. It is very crucial and effective. And seek helpful resources for information and advice from therapists if individual already feel that they cannot contain that that anger or that feeling, that they need to seek professional help, hotlines and support groups. And as I say, seek help, seek support from the community members, from organizations like you and me, and local cultural organization for legal advice, compensation as well. And participate and volunteer for anti-Asian racism activity that make us feel we are in control again. Because when individuals have been experiencing racism, that we felt so helpless. We felt that we lost the sense of belonging. Although I have been here for so many years, but after all these years, I still being regarded as a foreigner. That's someone responsible for COVID, that responsible for this pandemic. So you can imagine that is very traumatizing, and that really we felt is something we did nothing, and we have no control of, but we are responsible for. So we need to participate in certain activity to regain that control, that sense of control. Knowing that we are not alone, it is very, very, very crucial. I cannot stress the importance of that. In Hong Kong, we had organized a few times a focus group to talk about that. And almost every single time people cry. We cry because even for people who never experience, since they come to Canada, they may not experience the racism, but talking about that triggered the historical background, that triggered the historical, the history, that how our ancestors had gone through that. So talking about that, it is a release, and the feeling that we are not alone. We have many other also experiencing that. And I find that especially empowering. It is we have a support group with other racialized group as well, and that is even more empowered. That when we heard from the other group that how that manifests in their community, and we felt that strong sense of solidarity, and we recognize that when we are talking about racism, it is not only that group has to worry about, they have to fight about it. It is the whole society, because it impacts each one of us. Even we are born here, even we are not from the racialized group, but we eventually will affect us, because that is we are part of Canadian, we are part of the history. So another thing is very interesting I found. It is called the racialized trauma counselor. So I want to share with you this video.
Well, yesterday's events capped off a difficult year for Asian Americans and Canadians, the community seeing a rise in verbal and physical abuse since the pandemic began. And that conversation comes amid a racial reckoning in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Communities of color have been leading the calls to end systemic racism. And one expert in racial identity and trauma says that it can take a toll on mental health. Linda Lin is a counselor with a focus on racial identity and racial trauma, and she joins us from Vancouver tonight. Hi, Linda. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Linda, I have to say, I didn't know that a job like yours even existed. It's been a heavy year for many reasons between the pandemic and all of these conversations around race. Have you seen an increase in clients coming to talk to you specifically about how racism has taken a toll on their mental health?
Oh, yes, for sure. I am coming close with a wait list. And I'm seeing so much of my therapist colleagues who are also trying to heal the wounds of so many who are struggling in not just the pandemic, but also the racialized trauma that have been just awakening in our society.
So you specialize in racialized trauma. You just use that word. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I would say that racial trauma are overwhelming experiences based on oppression, discrimination, rejection. It could be prejudice towards one's race, which one can't change. It can be intergenerational. For example, children of immigrants like myself, we see our parents sacrifice, struggle, and suffering as we were growing up. And we are all just trying to translate and also protect them and their stories and trying to represent our parents growing up as well.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to ask, how does, people deal with many mental health issues that don't have to do with their race, but how important is it to understand the intersection of race and mental health?
Yeah, I would say that Asian or any racial trauma that we see, there are so many myths that oppress us. For example, there's this model minority myth, which a lot of us are trying to dismantle. That myth that Asians don't face real racism, that they're privileged and are basically white, which leads Asians like me to believe, like, is my trauma not being seen as a problem here? Can I even take space? And that, again, is when our problems are not seen as problems, that creates trauma, right? So these racialized aggressions are keep being minimalized in the society, and that creates trauma as well.
So what are some ways, and when you deal with clients, when you talk to them about ways that they can cope or deal with some of that racial trauma that you described, what are some coping mechanisms that you advise?
I would say take lots of time and space to grieve all of this heaviness. You're also in a pandemic. Talk about it if you can with people you trust. Advocate for yourself. Check in with yourself and your community if possible. Take lots of frequent digital breaks like I am doing right now. You can even unpack and explore with a therapist who can offer you that non-judgmental approach in that space. And yeah, speak up and take up space too. You deserve it.
And how can family members and friends support people who might be, their mental health has taken a toll, not just, this week, but this year, given all of the conversations that we're having around race?
Yeah, I would say with the pandemic going on for about a year now, we're all really feeling that exhaustion and all feeling helplessness, right? So contacting each other virtually is even getting harder too. So we can remind ourselves that it's not about fixing or solving someone's trauma, but we're just trying to listen, actively listen, and show up with empathy, and that even that is enough.
And, talk to me also about the fact that, you have a wait list. So are you trying to encourage other therapists to consider this in their work?
Yes, I would say that the BIPOC community have been so amazing. They've been creating resources and directories to connect a client going through racialized trauma, to connect them with a therapist who also specializes in racial trauma. There's directories like Healing in Color and Asian Mental Health Collective, and that makes therapy accessible for people dealing with this.
All right, Linda Lin is a counselor with a focus on racial identity and racial trauma. She is in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us. Well, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the first time I heard of that term. And I do some research, and in Toronto, there is also some organization, they specialize in providing counseling and support to people who are affected by this racialized trauma. Okay, so we, many of us, including myself, how about we as a bystander, what can we do when we are facing racism or we ourselves? There is some suggestion here. Very importantly, first of all, we have to make sure that we are staying safe. That is number one, while taking action. Stay safe. And then we can politely ask the perpetrator to repeat themselves or say something like, oh, you seem very upset. Can you tell me why you think or feel this way? Frequently, when people being asked that they feel, oh, they are taken aback, they feel reluctant. When they reflect that, why did they do certain action? They may just, withdraw what they say and leave. And also document or record what's happening. It is very, very important because we would, if it's not recorded, then people does not know the magnitude of this anti-Asian racism. And also engage other bystanders as co-witness. For example, we can turn to someone near us and ask, did you hear what I heard? Can we do something about it together? I remember when I was still in university in those days, there is a chapter talk about when we are in a public, how people, when we are in public, that when an incident happened, nobody would come to rescue or come to help because everyone is expected the other will do so. But if you name someone, for example, the gentleman in the blue shirt, can you come and help me? And when they are being called out, that people are much more likely to be ready to come and help. What the theory is that people do feel ready to help, but they just felt that they appropriate. Maybe other people would like to lend their hand instead of me. So if we call them, we turn to this individual and ask them specifically, very frequently, that they are ready to help. And we also turn to the victim and we can say, I witnessed what happened. I know the detail and I am here with you. And I will be here to support. And also we can drop down all the detail and we can help this victim to report. And if we have to call the police, be prepared to have a very thorough recount of what's happening if we want to make a change. And no matter how the situation play out, it is important to report it. When I say important to report it, not necessarily every time we have to report or call the police. But we can, there is so many other community that they are doing this research that I will share with you the link that later on that we can report so that they are complying this report. When this very systematic research and report were being in place, then we are able to present it, a strong evidence to present it, and recommend the government to address that. And of course, applying self-care for individual who has going through the racism, and also for us who is listening, even listening to those incidents, it has an impact on ourselves as well. So self-care is very crucial, very important. As I say, we have to acknowledge the impact of this racial trauma. As I say that when we are conducting those focus groups with parents, as well as with the students, the young students, that many times we find that at the beginning, they all say, oh, it doesn't matter. I just ignore it. I just dismiss it. But when we go deep into it, each individual recognize that in fact, it really intervenes with their self-perception. It also intervenes in their self-confidence as well. So we have to acknowledge the impact of this racial trauma. it is real, that indeed impact on grief. Oh, you have a hand, Lisa.
Hey, Maria, I just wanted to interrupt, just for the sake of time. It's 3 p.m. I'm sure some people would have to leave by now, but for the
I'm
rest
so
of you
sorry.
that are remaining, we just wanted to thank you for being with us so far. And I think we will be going over by about 10 minutes or so. What do you think, Maria?
Yeah. I am at the end.
Great, amazing. And we want to just make sure we provide a little bit of time for people to ask any questions or so. So
I am
Maria.
very sorry. Yeah, very sorry.
No problem, no problem at all. This is a very important topic, and I'm glad we are talking about this.
Yeah, so this is the last part. So acknowledge the impact and obtain the training in how are we going to address that and connect with others. As I say, very important, seek professional help, self-care. And I really like this too. A lot of psychologists finding that the experience of being understood and accepted is a key to overall human happiness and well-being. Thank you so much for everyone. And before I conclude, I welcome any question and feedback. And please kindly complete a short survey. I'm going to put on the chat box to every one of you. It only takes you not even 5 minutes. So I welcome any question and the feedback at this time. Let me close, stop sharing. Any question and any comment?
Hi, can we just ask a question? Is that okay?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay.
Of course.
My name is Jennifer. I thank you for the information.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, you had some good clips. Is it possible when you share the presentation that you will be sharing the links where we can re-listen or follow through?
Oh, definitely.
Because one of the challenges I find is when you go through the system of bringing forward a complaint, many would say that there is no documentation or mental and psychological harassment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you were talking about these impacts and how it shows in one's life, because it will impact their livelihood of having a job or not, right? So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I am going to share that. Okay. Oh, everyone in the team. Oh, sorry. Let me see. Yeah. So I will share my PowerPoint, and in my PowerPoint, you will see those links. Yeah, a lot of resources there, and also how you report the incidents as well. Yeah, and the resource that you can seek help.
So Maria, there was one question in the chat box from Corinne, who asked that she was wondering what percentage of Asians are racially profiled. Would you have any data on that, or would you like to share that later?
I do not have that the number of the Asian, but as I share in one of the slides, the World Health Organization, they found that 76% of the report of the racism are from Asian women. Yeah, because like when we're talking about Asian, it can be, it's diverse, right? Diverse, but for the Asian population, especially among the women's group, they are the most, affected. The report are being filed is 77%.
Great, thank you, Maria. Does anybody else have any questions or any comments or anything that they would like to say to Maria?
There is just one other question I'm seeing, I think from Bree Hawkins
Yeah.
in the chat saying she's having mic issues. Would you say that the Asian population are now open to seeking counseling more than in years before?
Oh, thank you so much for that great question. I would say that, one thing I'm very thankful for, any good point from this pandemic is that people became more receptive when we are talking about mental health. Before, I still remember when I go to the community to talk about mental health, I was being constantly told, especially in my community, Chinese community, they will say, oh, we don't have that issue. You don't need to come and talk about that. But we are welcome for stress management, So people do not perceive mental health. When we talk about mental health, they perceive that as a mental illness. But since the pandemic, people are much more receptive. They are much more ready to talk about mental health and talk about depression, talk about disorder, because not only a certain amount of population are talking about it. It became a pandemic itself. That's what they said. I mean, on top of the racism. So people are more ready to talk about the mental health impact and also to seek help or to come out and talk about it. I hope I answer your question. Is there any more question?
I just saw one other one in the chat that I might just say out loud.
Okay.
Somebody, R. Martin, is saying, I know we have different communities in working with the Asian population, but is there any single body or organization that advocates for this anti-Asian racism? And if yes, can we have the name of the organization? And telephone number.
Well, I mean, there is agency that helping the whole Asian group. As I say, it includes in my email. I will for sure, Misha, you can send it out to all participants because you have the email of all the participants, right, today. Yes. So in that link, you just click on that link, it will lead you to those organizations because not only one, there is many organizations and resources.
Okay, I think the rest of the questions in the chat are more like comments, and they're really great comments. So if you take a second to read through, guys, they're great. But does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to just say out loud for Maria?
Yeah. Before I end here, I just want to stress one very important point. When we are talking about anti-Asian racism today, I want to also humbly remind everyone that we ourselves have to be mindful. Each one of us may have our own discrimination. I mean, I have to admit that since I was born, I was told certain facts according to my ancestor, according to my colleague, according to the important people that raised me. So the important thing is that for each one of us to be mindful of our own value, also our own assumption, our own bias. Because only by doing that, we can be honestly, when we are addressing racism, not only about the anti-Asian racism, it's any form of racism that, that we have to be honestly addressing, that we have to address our own first. So thank you so much. And I thank you for this.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Maria, for doing such an informative presentation. You've gone into such great details and depth about this topic. Being someone from, an Asian heritage, I completely understood everything and I resonated with everything. And we're so thankful that you were able to come and, provide us this education, as I'd like to call it. And we're grateful for that. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to come and join us. I know everybody has such busy schedules, but you came and you showed us support, and you're here, and we're very happy and hope that once we have published on our YouTube page this recorded session, you will be able to also share with your organizations, your colleagues, and your networks, so we can continue to raise the awareness about anti-Asian racism. If you have any questions, feel free to send an email to Maria. Maria, you can put your email in the chat box.
Sure. Okay.
And that's about it. Thank you so much, and wish you guys have a safe last day of summer. Don't get caught up in a storm or a tornado. And hope the sky's clear tomorrow and you have a great first day of fall. Thank you, everyone. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Okay.